You have been moving through your days like someone still waiting for the jury to come back, as if your worthiness is a verdict, still pending, still subject to appeal. But the Stoics drew a sharp and unforgiving line between two kinds of people. The first kind lives perpetually on the doorstep of their own life, hat in hand, waiting to be let in, waiting for the conditions to align, waiting for the sign, the season, the person, the circumstance that finally makes it feel safe enough to move. The second kind walks through walls, not because they are fearless, not because they have more talent or better circumstances or cleaner luck, but because somewhere, in some quiet and unremarkable moment, they made a decision so complete that hesitation lost its address. They stopped renting doubt and started living in certainty. This video is about that second kind of person, and more importantly, about the precise, learnable architecture of how they think, speak, move, and persist. We are going to go deep, not into hype, not into the motivational noise that fades by Thursday and disappears by the weekend, into the genuine psychological and philosophical mechanics of living as though the outcome has already been written in your favor, into what it actually costs, what it actually requires, and what it actually produces, not as a one-time peak experience, but as a sustained, daily, practiced way of being in the world. And if that strikes something true in you, if some part of you recognizes that you have been pausing at the threshold of your own potential, waiting for something external to confirm that you are ready, then stay with this. Because what we are about to walk through has the power to shift not just how you feel for the next hour, but how your life actually begins to organize itself around you over the coming months and years. Consider subscribing to Stoic Horizon. This channel exists as a deliberate space where your growth is not accidental. It is chosen, designed, and yours. Most people are waiting for the world to hand them a sign, a signal that it is finally time, that conditions are sufficiently favorable, that enough people have given approval, that the wind is right and the moment is auspicious and the stars, if you believe in that kind of thing, are reasonably aligned. And they stand there, patient, reasonable, irresponsible, watching their life execute a slow and dignified retreat into the background while they wait for permission that will never come. Here is the thing about external permission. It is structurally unavailable. The world is not a court that reviews your case and stamps your credentials and issues a certificate of readiness. It is a mirror, and mirrors do not initiate. They reflect. What you project, they return. What you withhold from your own life, the mirror obediently withholds back. Show up with hesitation, and the mirror reflects a hesitant world. Show up with the certainty of someone who has already decided, and the world, slowly, then suddenly, begins to reorganize itself around that energy. The Stoics understood this with a clarity that bordered on the uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius, night writing in the private margins of his own mind, in notes never intended for public eyes, in the kind of raw and honest inner dialogue most people never commit to the page, kept returning to a single gravitational truth. The quality of your inner world determines the shape of your outer one, not the other way around. He was the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, surrounded by flattery and catastrophe in equal measure, and he kept reminding himself that the only domain he actually governed was his own perception. The only territory he could truly claim was the 6 inches between his ears. Your life takes the shape of the decision you made when no one was watching. That is not poetry. That is mechanism. When you decide, truly decide. Not just hope or intend or place vaguely on a mental wish list for later consideration. Something structural changes inside you. You stop being a person who is trying to win, and you become a person who has already chosen what winning means. That distinction sounds subtle. It is not. It is the difference between a ship with a broken rudder drifting toward a harbor and a ship whose captain has already plotted the course and is simply executing it, weather be damned. Both ships may arrive, but only one of them was navigating from certainty. People follow the certain. Not because certainty is loud, it rarely is. In fact, the deepest certainty tends to be almost silent. It does not need to announce itself, because it has nothing to prove. Walk into any room next to someone who has truly decided who they are and what they are doing, and you will feel it before they open their mouth. It is in the economy of their movements, the steadiness of their eyes, the way they do not need the room to respond in order to feel legitimated. They are not performing. They are simply being what they have already become. That is not arrogance. Arrogance requires an audience. It needs others to affirm it in order to survive. What we are describing is something fundamentally different, a self-sustaining inner state that is independent of applause, independent of external outcomes, independent of the opinions of anyone standing in the room. It asks nothing from the world, because it is already complete in itself. Doubt is a very skilled attorney. Give it 5 minutes of uninterrupted attention and it will build a case so thorough, so airtight, so internally consistent, that not moving forward will feel like wisdom. It will dress fear in the vocabulary of practicality. It will reframe paralysis as patience and call avoidance strategic. It will tell you that you are simply being thoughtful, that good things take time, that you are not ready yet but will be soon, very soon. Once a few more pieces fall into place, once conditions improve slightly, once you feel a little more prepared, and while it builds that case, time moves. The window that felt wide and welcoming begins to narrow. Not because the opportunity disappeared. Opportunities are more renewable than we tend to assume, but because the person who hesitated changed. They became more practiced at hesitating. Their muscles for doubt grew stronger and more defined, while their muscles for action quietly atrophied from disuse. They become, over time, someone whose default response to possibility is caution, and caution, in sufficient doses, produces exactly the life that the fearful part of them was trying to protect against. Seneca watched this happen across a lifetime of observing human behavior in the highest courts of Roman power, and what he wrote about it remains surgical in its precision. We are not victims of a short life, he said, but of a wasted one. The span is usually sufficient. The squandering is in how we spend the hours, in the endless revisiting, in the rehearsal of worst-case futures that never arrive, in the comfortable numbness of indecision that feels like safety, but is actually stagnation given a respectable name. Certainty does not arrive because you have eliminated uncertainty. It does not wait for all variables to be controlled and all risks to be assessed and all possible outcomes to be mapped in advance. It arrives because you have decided that uncertainty is no longer the gatekeeper. You are moving anyway. Not because the outcome is guaranteed, not because the fear has dissolved into some permanent state of calm, but because the cost of staying still has finally been weighed, honestly and completely, against the cost of moving, and staying still, lost. You do not defeat fear by waiting for it to leave. You defeat it by moving while it is still in the room. This is the truth that separates the person who builds from the person who only imagines building. Action does not require the absence of fear. It requires the decision that fear no longer chairs the meeting. You demote it. You acknowledge it. The Stoics were not fools who pretended that danger was not real or that risk was an illusion. But you stop giving it the deciding vote. You let it speak, and then you proceed anyway, because you have already decided that your commitment is larger than your discomfort. And here is what happens neurologically, practically, in the actual lived texture of your days. When you act despite fear, you produce evidence. Small evidence at first. A conversation you had that went better than expected. A step you took that did not destroy you. A thing you built or said or chose that turned out to be survivable. And that evidence accumulates. Day by day, choice by choice, it begins to outweigh the imagined catastrophes that doubt was using as its primary, raw material. Say, the record of what you have actually survived begins to compete with the story of everything you might fail at. And, slowly, the record wins. Epictetus understood this in a way that was not theoretical but lived. Born into slavery, denied every external advantage that Roman society could offer, stripped of the most basic freedoms most people never think about. He built a philosophy of internal sovereignty so powerful that it outlasted the empire itself. His core teaching was not that circumstances do not matter, they clearly do, and he experienced this more directly than most, but that your relationship to circumstances is yours to command, completely and without exception. The person who acts as though they cannot lose is not pretending the obstacles are not real. They are choosing to interpret every obstacle as part of the path rather than as proof that the path is wrong. That reinterpretation is not denial. It is a fundamental choice about the meaning of difficulty. Before anything exists in the world, it must first exist clearly in a mind. This is not mysticism. This is architecture. Before a building stands, it lives in a drawing, in the precise lines and measurements of someone who could see the finished structure before a single foundation stone was laid. Before a company ships its first product, it existed in someone's focused imagination long enough to be described, refined, tested against criticism, challenged by reality, and finally translated into action. The problem is not that people lack ambition. Most people carry enormous ambitions. They carry them quietly, like a flame sheltered in cupped hands. The problem is that their vision is too vague to function as an instruction, too impressionistic, too soft around the edges to actually organize behavior around. Ask someone what they want, and they will usually answer with a category: success, peace, freedom, enough money, a good relationship, a life that feels meaningful. These are categories, not destinations. But ask them to describe what success looks like on a specific Tuesday afternoon 3 years from now. What they are doing, who is around them, what the light looks like in their workspace, what they feel in their chest when they check in with themselves. And the picture blurs. Edges dissolve. Colors drain from the image. The words become abstract again, and a blurred vision cannot organize behavior. The brain does not pursue fog. It pursues form. It moves toward the specific, the vivid, the emotionally charged, the image it has visited enough times to recognize as home. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul is dyed by the color of its thoughts. He meant this not as a figure of speech, but as a precise description of psychological mechanics, that the repeated texture of your inner dialogue shapes the very substance of who you are becoming, not just in a metaphorical sense, but in the deep structural way that a river eventually reshapes the stone it runs across. What you rehearse, you become. Not eventually, in some distant future where all the preparations have been made. Continuously, right now. Every rehearsal is a small increment of becoming. This means vision is not a destination you pin on a wall and admire occasionally when you happen to walk past. It is a living practice, a daily return, a deliberately cultivated discipline of closing the gap between your current self-concept and the self-concept of the person you have decided to become. You visit the image again, not because you forgot it, but because you understand that reinforcement is precisely how the mind converts possibility into pattern. First, it is a thought. Then, it is a practiced thought. Then, it is an assumption. Something you no longer have to consciously generate because the mind treats it as background truth. Then it is identity. And at the level of identity, behavior stops requiring effort. You do not motivate yourself to be who you already believe you are. You simply act from that belief, automatically and consistently, in ways you would never have predicted when the belief was still fragile. Carl Jung described this in a different vocabulary, but with the same precision. What you repeatedly attend to, you become. The inner world is not passive decoration for the life happening around you. It is generative. It is the actual engine. It produces the outer life, not instantly, not through magical thinking, but inevitably and reliably. The way the slope of a hillside inevitably determines where the water runs when the rain comes. You do not have to force the water. You have to shape the terrain. So here is the practical discipline that emerges from this understanding. Build the vision with specificity. Not as a daydream, not as a motivational poster, not as a wish list you return to once a month when guilt provides sufficient activation energy. Build it with the level of detail and intentionality you would bring to a real architectural drawing, the kind that an actual building would be built from. What does success feel like in your physical body? What posture do you carry? What decisions are you making effortlessly from that place? Decisions that feel difficult and effortful from your current position. How do people respond to you, and how do you respond to them? What work are you doing, and why does that work matter to you beyond the obvious surface reasons? Give the image emotion. Give it sensory texture. Give it the specificity that your nervous system can actually use as an instruction set, and then return to it. Not once, with the enthusiasm of a new beginning. Daily. With the same unremarkable consistency you bring to eating or brushing your teeth. Not because it is glamorous, not because it always feels profound, but because the compound interest of daily return is the most powerful force available to any human being working to change their trajectory. Because unlike eating or breathing, the vision will absolutely fade if you do not tend it. And when it fades, when the image loses its color and specificity, you default back to the familiar past. And the familiar past is, by definition, everything you are trying to move beyond. The most underestimated act of creation in a human life is the sentence. Not the book you will someday write, not the speech you will someday give, not the grand proclamation or the public declaration or the manifesto you will eventually produce when the time is right and the words are perfect. The quiet, private, everyday sentence, spoken to yourself while you are getting ready in the morning, while you are sitting in traffic watching the light change, while you are in that ambiguous space between sleep and waking where the mind is most soft and most susceptible to instruction. The sentence no one else hears. The sentence you probably do not even consciously register as significant. Every sentence you produce about yourself and your future is not just communication, it is construction. Your subconscious is recording everything. Every qualifier, every hedge, every hypothetical failure scenario you casually raise and then lower again. It does not evaluate your words for accuracy or fairness. It does not fact-check against external reality or wait for confirmation from the outside world before treating your words as instruction. It hears the rhythm and architecture of your language and begins laying bricks accordingly. When you say, "If this works," just those 3 words, dropped casually into your inner monologue, you have already built a structural weakness into your own foundation. You have told the deepest part of your mind, "Failure is an option I am actively keeping on the table." The mind, helpful and efficient as always, begins preparing for that option. It starts distributing processing resources toward the exits. It keeps one eye on the escape route so it can respond quickly when the failure you implied might arrive actually does. And you have done this with 3 words and a subordinate clause. But when you say, "This is working," not as self-deception, not as a deliberate ignoring of real obstacles and genuine difficulties, but as a posture of committed forward motion, something neurologically distinct happens. The brain shifts from threat detection mode to resource allocation mode. It stops scanning for reasons to stop and starts solving for how to continue. It begins asking, "How do I make this work?" rather than "What happens if this does not?" That shift is not cosmetic. It produces genuinely different actions, different choices, different patterns of noticing opportunity. It produces different outcomes. Epictetus said, "First declare to yourself what you would be, and then do what you must do." He did not say, "Think about it in a general way." He did not say, "Write it in a private journal and keep it safely hidden." He said, "Declare, speak it." Because speech is not merely a reflection of thought. It is a force that actively shapes thought, retroactively and continuously, in ways that thought alone cannot accomplish. The words you use about your own journey are the scaffolding on which that journey is constructed. If the scaffolding is provisional and riddled with escape hatches and hedged at every joint, the structure that rises from it will reflect that precisely. So examine your private language with genuine honesty, the sentences no one else hears, the running commentary of your inner life. Are they instructions toward your highest self, or are they a continuous editorial on all the reasons things probably will not work out? Because you are always, without exception, talking to yourself. The question is not whether you are doing it, but what you are saying when you do. Consider the way a master builder speaks about what they are creating, not the builder who is doubting the project or considering abandoning it. The builder who is fully committed, who has staked their reputation on this structure, who has no exit in their mind. They do not say, "I am hoping the foundation holds." They do not say, "Maybe the roof will be okay if conditions cooperate." They speak from the certainty of someone who has done this before and knows, structurally, what is required. And their language is organized entirely around the building taking shape, not around the hypothetical rubble. Their words lay the plan. The plan guides the action. The structure follows the words. Your life is no different. The sentences you speak daily are drafts of the structure you are building. Speak from the outcome. Describe your developing life in the language not of someone who hopes things will work, but of someone who has already seen where this is going and is executing the plan. Let your words carry the weight of someone who has signed the contract and already broken ground. Do that every single day with the same fidelity you would bring to keeping any significant promise, because that is precisely what you are doing. You are making a promise to the most important person in your life. You are making it to yourself. Anyone can sprint for a week. Sustained motion, the kind that actually produces transformation, and the kind that compounds over months and years into a life you would not have predicted from where you started, is a fundamentally different animal. Motivation is a sprinter. It is fast, genuinely exhilarating, and constitutionally short-breathed. It peaks at the beginning of things. New years, new goals, new chapters. That specific surge of clarity that arrives when you have just made an important decision and the future feels freshly open, and the obstacles have not yet appeared in full resolution on the horizon. Motivation fills the starting blocks magnificently. It is a genuine gift. But it was never designed for the middle of the race, and the middle of every race is where everything that matters actually happens. And then the obstacles arrive. Not as a dramatic confrontation, but as the grinding reality of the plateau. The silence where you expected feedback. The days when the work feels heavy and unrewarded. When the results are not yet visible. When the original surge of inspiration has faded to something you can barely remember feeling. The days when staying looks like stubbornness and leaving looks like wisdom. This is where most people make their exit. Not loudly, not with a dramatic declaration of defeat, but quietly, incrementally, with the help of increasingly sophisticated rationalizations that all share the same basic architecture. The decision to stop was actually a smart decision, a mature decision, a sign of growth. Persistence is not a mood. It is not a feeling you wait for or a state you hope to enter when conditions become supportive. It is a commitment architecture, a structural feature of your relationship to your own decisions. When you have truly decided, not dabbled in the idea, not tried it with one hand on the exit, but decided with the full weight of your conviction, persistence is not something you manufacture each morning through heroic acts of self-discipline. It emerges naturally from the decision itself. You do not have to talk yourself into returning to the work. The work is where you live now. Returning is simply how you spend your time. The Stoics had a name for this inner loyalty: discipline. But they did not mean it the way the word tends to be used today, as punishment, as restriction, as the grim business of denying yourself things you want. They meant it as a kind of sacred faithfulness to your own chosen path. The way a musician practices scales not because they love every scale, but because the music they are building matters more than the comfort they might gain from stopping. The way a craftsman returns to the workshop not because every day in the workshop is pleasurable, but because something real and lasting is being made there. And that matters. Carl Jung observed, with characteristic directness, that you are what you do, not what you say you will do, not what you intend to do, not what you have excellent reasons for having planned to do. That gap between declaration and action is where most lives quietly unravel. Not in any single dramatic failure, not in one terrible choice that turns everything wrong, but in the accumulated daily distance between what someone says matters to them and what they actually do with their time and attention when no one is measuring. Persistence is the bridge that closes that gap. It is unglamorous almost by definition, because if it were glamorous, everyone would do it. And if everyone did it, it would not be the differentiating variable. The most important work in any significant endeavor happens in the hours when no one is watching and nothing visible is happening, when the measurements do not move, when the feedback is silent, when the temptation to interpret the lack of immediate results as evidence of fundamental wrongness is at its most seductive. Those are precisely the hours when the real structure is being built, underground, out of sight, unseen by anyone including you, while the surface appears unchanged. Seneca wrote about the extraordinary waste produced by the habit of constant restarting, abandoning commitments at the first serious friction, chasing the reliable dopamine hit of new beginnings rather than grinding through the less exciting work of finishing what you said you would. Each restart feels like renewal, like a fresh start, a clean slate, a chance to begin again without the weight of the previous attempt. But repeated restarts are not renewable energy. They are a deeply ingrained pattern of abandonment. And a mind that repeatedly abandons its own commitments begins to stop trusting its own word. It hears its own declarations with a kind of internal skepticism, we will see, that slowly corrodes the relationship between intention and action. Persistence heals this. Every single time you return, after the difficult day, after the discouraging result, after the period of silence when nothing seemed to be working, you are casting a vote. You are voting for the person you are becoming. You are providing your own mind with evidence of a specific and important kind. I am the kind of person who follows through. That belief, accumulated vote by vote over time, becomes one of the most powerful personal assets you can build. Not because following through guarantees any specific result, but because a person who consistently follows through becomes someone whose commitment actually means something to the world. And far more importantly, to themselves. Transformation does not arrive on the schedule we assign it. We want the lightning version. The single moment of such complete clarity that everything changes overnight. We want to go to sleep as the person we have been and wake up as the person we intend to be, with the gap between those two selves closed by the transformative power of a single decision or insight or experience. But that is not how any change of substance actually works. It was not how the Stoics understood it, and it is not how the nervous system, which is ultimately the terrain all change must pass through, operates. Real transformation is seismic in its eventual impact and almost completely invisible in its daily process. It happens the way stone wears, not in any single catastrophic storm, but in the daily and unremarkable accumulation of rain, wind, freeze and thaw, pressure and time. What you rehearse daily, you become eventually. And the daily repetitions are not the preliminary work you complete before the real transformation can begin. They are the transformation itself, happening in real time. In every moment you return to the vision and speak the declaration and take the step. This is why vision must be revisited, why language must be practiced, why the internal rehearsal of who you are becoming is not motivational decoration that makes the real work feel better. It is the actual mechanism. The subconscious does not distinguish cleanly between an event that has genuinely occurred and an event that has been rehearsed with sufficient emotional specificity and intensity. Neuroscience and Stoic philosophy, arriving from completely different starting points and speaking completely different vocabularies, I land in exactly the same place. The inner world is literally, not metaphorically, not poetically, but literally, training the behavior of the outer one. Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will run your life and you will call it fate. That unconscious programming, the inherited scripts, the beliefs installed before you had the cognitive capacity to evaluate their truth, the reflexes built by old evidence from old contexts that no longer apply. is not malicious. It is not your enemy. It is simply running outdated software, making predictions about the present based on patterns from the past. And the way you update it is not through sheer willpower, which tends to be exhausting and temporary. It is through repetition, through the consistent, patient, our daily rehearsal of a narrative that better reflects the person you have decided to become. Every time you return to the vision with intention, every time you speak the declaration even when your voice is uncertain, every time you choose to act from your future self rather than your current circumstances, you are rewriting the script, not all at once. That is not how rewriting works. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, with a directionality that eventually becomes unmistakable, even if it is invisible on any single day. The change is happening. It is just happening below the surface where you cannot easily observe it. Marcus Aurelius practiced this, the daily return, the deliberate reinforcement, not because he was psychologically weak or needed constant propping up, but because he understood precisely how a strong mind actually functions. His private journals, written for no one, never intended to be read, are full of returns, revisitations of principles he already knew, reminders of truths he had already completely understood, not because he had forgotten them in the way you forget where you put your keys, but because he recognized that understanding a truth at the cognitive level is not the same as embodying it at the level of automatic action. Embodiment requires repetition. The daily return is not redundant. It is the mechanism. So the discipline is not exotic or elaborate or dependent on the right emotional state. It does not require hours of ceremony or a particular set of circumstances or the experience of feeling motivated. It requires only this: a daily, faithful return to the clearest possible version of who you have decided to become. Speak it, write it, feel it for 2 minutes or for 50. The duration matters less than the consistency. Build the image a degree sharper each time you return. Let it become more familiar than the old story you have been telling yourself about your limitations and your history. Let it feel less like an aspiration and more like a memory. The memory of a future you are already walking toward with each deliberate step. That shift, when the vision stops feeling like something you are hoping for and starts feeling like something you are moving toward with certainty, changes everything downstream. Your choices begin aligning with the vision without requiring deliberate effort on your part. Your habits adjust naturally. Your presence begins communicating something that your words do not need to explain and that you do not need to perform. And the world, which was always a mirror, begins reflecting a different face. No one becomes their highest version alone. The mythology of the self-made person, the lone hero who rises against all opposition through the sheer force of individual will, needing nothing from anyone, owing nothing to anyone, is a compelling narrative and a largely inaccurate description of how human growth actually works. Look closely at any significant achievement, any genuine transformation, any life that made something real from something that began as possibility, and you will find a web of relationships that made it possible. Teachers, mentors, peers, partners, rivals, critics. People whose belief functioned as a scaffold during the periods when the person's own belief was insufficient to hold the weight of what they were trying to build. The people you stand closest to are not merely company. They are an active force operating on your identity. Their beliefs about what is possible quietly recalibrate your own sense of possibility, so gradually that you rarely notice it happening. Their standards become your baseline, the floor below which you do not imagine yourself falling, and the ceiling above which you do not imagine yourself rising. Their language seeps into your internal dialogue until you cannot always distinguish their voice from your own. Their ambitions, or the precise absence of ambitions, become the water you swim in, and water shapes everything it contacts, invisibly, continuously, without ever asking permission to do so. Jung described the meeting of two personalities as a genuine chemical reaction in which both substances are transformed. He was not speaking loosely or poetically. He meant that human contact is irreversibly alchemical, that you do not leave any significant encounter unchanged, and that the cumulative effect of the encounters you choose and the proximity you maintain is one of the primary forces shaping who you are becoming, operating at a depth that is often difficult to observe but impossible to escape. This makes proximity one of the most consequential decisions available to you. More consequential, in many practical situations, than the specific strategies you choose or the exact sequence of actions you take, or the technical skills you develop. You can have the best possible plan and execute it with genuine effort in an environment that continuously erodes your certainty, and given sufficient time, the environment wins. The human mind is too fundamentally social, too deeply shaped by the reality of the people around it, to be entirely immune to that erosion. Your certainty is real, but it is not invincible, and it requires the right environment to thrive. Seneca's counsel on this matter was characteristically direct and specific. Choose the company of people who have the genuine capacity to improve you. He did not say surround yourself with enthusiastic supporters who validate every decision and celebrate every inclination. He said people who improve you, which sometimes, often even, means people who challenge you. People who hold you to what you said you wanted when the temptation to settle becomes attractive. People who call your drift before you have even consciously noticed it. People who take you seriously enough to tell you the truth. The right circle does not require you to explain your intensity or justify your standards or apologize for caring this much about what you are building. In the right environment, your seriousness is not anomalous. It is the norm. Your discipline is not isolating. It is connecting. Your vision does not make you strange. It makes you recognized, understood, known in a way that casual company rarely provides. And that specific experience of being genuinely understood in your ambition, of having your highest self treated as the expected version rather than the aspirational one, is one of the most energizing and sustaining forces in a human life. Not because it is emotionally comfortable. Genuine accountability is rarely comfortable because it requires honesty, and honesty is rarely comfortable. But because it produces the specific form of support that actually serves your growth. Not the applause you feel good receiving, not the reassurance that smooths over the difficulty. The honest mirror. The person who says, calmly and without cruelty, "You said you wanted this. What you are doing right now is not that. Return to the path," and then supports you while you do. Be thoughtful, then, about the environments you inhabit repeatedly. Not with paranoia, not with the brittle insularity of someone who needs perfect validation at every turn and cannot tolerate being questioned or challenged or held accountable, but with the quiet vigilance of someone who understands that identity is not a permanent fortress. It is a living current, and currents are profoundly influenced by what surrounds them, by the terrain they move through, the obstacles they encounter, the channels they have been carved into by history and habit. You do not need a vast circle of profoundly aligned minds. Seneca understood this. He was speaking not about filling your social calendar with high-achieving contacts, but about the quality of a few genuine bonds. Harmony of purpose matters more than volume of connection. One relationship of genuine mutual accountability, built on shared standards and honest investment in each other's growth, can carry more developmental force than any number of casual, supportive, well-meaning connections that never require you to be more than you currently are. Find those aligned minds, or build the conditions in which they can find you by doing your work visibly enough, holding your standards consistently enough, speaking your vision clearly enough, that others who share the same direction can recognize you from across the room, and when you find them, when you discover the company in whose presence your highest self feels most natural and most expected, protect that proximity with the same intentionality you bring to your most important commitments. Because when your certainty falters, and it will falter, as certainly as motivation eventually fades, because certainty is not a static possession but a renewable resource that requires ongoing cultivation and maintenance. Those aligned minds are the ones who hold the thread until you can hold it yourself again. They remember the vision when you have temporarily lost sight of it. They hold the standard when you are tempted to lower it, and you do the same for them, on the days when their certainty needs shoring up from the outside. That reciprocity is not dependency. It is the architecture of anything built to last. There is a moment that changes everything, and it does not arrive loudly. It does not come with fanfare or external recognition or applause from the world around you. There is no ceremony. The world does not pause to acknowledge it or mark the occasion. There is just a quiet, internal shift. The moment you stop waiting to become worthy and start behaving as though you already are. Not because you have finally achieved something that justifies the shift. Not because someone of authority has finally confirmed your value. But because you decided, alone, in the privacy of your own conviction, that you are done shrinking yourself to fit the dimensions of your doubt. That you are done living at partial capacity because you were waiting for circumstances you could not control to improve before claiming the life you can already begin building. When you begin living from that place, acting as though the victory is already written, carrying your future in your posture and your choices before the world has confirmed it in its results, something begins to happen in your environment. It is difficult to describe precisely, but it is impossible to dismiss once you have experienced it. Doors do not open because of magic. They open because clarity has its own gravity, and people who possess it draw responses from the world that vague hoping never manages to produce. People around you respond differently. Not because you have convinced them of anything, but because something in your bearing communicates that you have made a decision they have not yet made for themselves. This is not about performing confidence. Performed confidence is exhausting to sustain, requires constant audience management, and is transparent to anyone paying close attention. What we are describing is something fundamentally quieter and far more durable. The genuine reorganization of your behavior around a committed self-concept. You stop doing things in order to prove something to the world, to earn its validation or defeat its skepticism. You start doing things because they are consistent with who you have already decided to be. The source of your action changes. And when the source changes, from proving to expressing, or from earning to being, the sustainability changes with it. And when the sustainability changes, the results eventually must follow. Marcus Aurelius wrote that whatever obstructs the path forward can also be used as the path forward, that the impediment and the advancement are not opposites, but the same material, with their nature determined entirely by how you choose to meet them. This is the perspective of someone who has already decided. For that person, obstacles are not evidence against the goal or proof that the goal was wrong, or signs from the universe that you should reconsider. They are terrain. They are part of the process of building, not interruptions to it. They shape the thing you are creating in ways that an obstacle-free path never could. Like living as though it is already yours does not mean pretending the gap between where you are and where you are going does not exist. It means refusing to let the gap govern your behavior. You are completely aware of the distance. You are working honestly and diligently within it. But you are not waiting for it to close before you start moving as someone for whom closing it is inevitable. That is the distinction. The outcome is not yet real, but your commitment to it is. Your certainty is not based on current evidence. It is prior to current evidence. It is the cause of the evidence that will eventually arrive, not its effect. That posture, forward, unhurried, unperturbed, is not something you wait to deserve through sufficient achievement. It is something you practice until it becomes automatic, until it becomes the natural texture of how you move through your days. And as it becomes automatic, the world does what mirrors do. It reflects. It begins organizing around the signal you are consistently sending, not because you forced it, because you finally stopped sending a mixed signal. Seneca wrote that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. The person who lives as though it is already theirs does not count on luck as a primary strategy. They create the conditions of internal and external alignment so consistently and completely that when opportunity arrives, and it does arrive, for everyone who stays in motion long enough, it finds them already prepared, already positioned, already moving in the right direction to receive it. You stop asking whether you are enough. You start acting in ways that honor the fact that you are. You stop trying to convince anyone, least of all the most skeptical voice in your own head. You stop explaining yourself and start building. You stop seeking the external validation that would justify beginning to move differently, and you move. And you let the movement itself be its own justification. That is the quiet revolution, not the kind that announces itself with a press release, but the kind that transforms everything, incrementally and irreversibly, in the hours when no one is watching and nothing appears to be changing. Not because the world changed, because you did. And the world, being a mirror, had no choice but to follow. So let this be the moment you stop living as though the outcome of your life is still under negotiation. You do not need one more sign. You do not need better timing or cleaner circumstances or a different starting point or a more favorable wind. You need the decision, made fully, clearly, without the hidden escape hatch of maybe built into the foundation, that you are done waiting for someone or something external to choose you, that you have decided to do the choosing instead, that the long postponement of your own becoming is over, not because the conditions have improved, but because you have decided that conditions were never the real gatekeeper. The Stoics did not wait for life to become easy or comfortable or unambiguous before choosing to live in accordance with their values. They chose to live well, and they discovered. Marcus Aurelius in the middle of a plague and endless war, Seneca while navigating the most dangerous court in the ancient world, our Epictetus without freedom or wealth or any of the advantages most people feel they need. That this choice, made consistently and renewed daily, transforms what life feels like from the inside. Not because the circumstances became easier, often they became considerably harder, but because the person meeting those circumstances had changed. They had become someone for whom difficulty was useful material rather than a verdict against them. You have everything you need to make that decision right now, not when it feels right. Not when fear has stepped aside to give you clear passage. Not when the circumstances have aligned themselves into something more cooperative. Now, because the feeling of readiness is downstream from the decision, not upstream from it. You do not feel ready and then decide. You decide, and then you begin to feel like the person who decided. The feeling follows the choice. It always does. It cannot arrive before the choice because it is produced by the choice. Let that decision echo through everything you do from this moment forward, through every sentence you speak to yourself in the quiet hours, every hour you invest in the vision, every moment you return to the work after the discouragement and the silence, and the days when nothing visible is happening. Let it echo through every step you take in the company of people who hold you to your highest self. Let it echo through the obstacles you meet and the setbacks you absorb, and the slow, invisible, underground work of becoming someone whose life reflects what they decided in that private moment. If this reached something real in you, if something in these ideas landed in a place that matters, that you recognize, that you have been circling for longer than you can easily name, then consider this your invitation. Like this video and join us here at Stoic Horizon, where this kind of thinking is not a one-time flash of inspiration, but a sustained, deliberate, and daily practice. Because you deserve not just a moment of feeling like you could become your best self, but an actual way of living as though you already are. There is another step waiting for you. Watch one of the videos on your screen. Keep building, keep returning, keep becoming. The life that already belongs to you is not somewhere ahead of you, waiting to be earned through sufficient suffering or enough preparation. It is inside you, right now, waiting only to be claimed.